Hare Krishna. The music a little bit louder. Hare Krishna. Hari Bol. Hare Bol. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Hari Bol. Hari Bol. Okay. Hare Krishna. Jai Shri Shri Guru Gauranga Gandharvika Giridhari Shri Shri Radha Vinod Bihari Jiyo Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Govinda Gopinath Madan Mohan Jiyo Ki Jai Jai Nityalila Pravishto Vishnupad Paramahansa Asto Tarasata Shri Srila Abhai Charanaravinda Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Nitya Lila Pravishta Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Asto Tarasata Shri Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj Ki Jai Tadiya Avirbhav Mamaha Mahotsav Titi Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai Nitya Lila Pravishta Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Asto Tarasata Shri Srila Bhakti Vedanta Narayana Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai Srila Bhakti Vedanta Vaman Nitya Lila Pravishta Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Asto Tarasata Shri Srila Bhakti Pragyan Keshava Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai Nitya Lila Pravishta Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Asto Tarasata Shri Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Thakur Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Saparikar Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Jai Mahabhagavat Srila Gaura Kishore Das Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai Shri Srila Sachidananda Bhakti Vinod Thakur Ki Jai Vaishnava Sarvabhaum Shri Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai Shri Gaudiya Vedanta Charja Baladev Vijabhushan Prabhu Ki Jai Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur Ki Jai Srila Narottam Srinivas Shyamananda Prabhu Trai Ki Jai Srila Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami Prabhu Ki Jai Shri Rupa Sanatan Bhatta Raghunath Shri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Das Raghunath Shad Goswami Prabhu Ki Jai Srila Swarup Damodar Roy Ramanandari Gaura Parshada Vrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Sikaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Jai Shri Shri Navadvip Dham Ki Jai Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopi Go Govardhan Dvara Shavanatmaka Shri Braj Mandala Dham Ki Jai Shri Shyama Kunda Radha Kunda Yamuna Ganga Tulsi Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Govinda Radha Gopinath Radha Madan Mohan Jiyo Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Gokulananda Radha Shyama Sundar Radha Raman Radha Damodar Jiyo Ki Jai Jai Shrimati Vanita Vishaka Adi Ashtasaki Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Rupa Manjari Rati Manjari Adi Manjari Vrinda Ki Jai Shrimati Vrinda Devi Ki Jai Shrimati Purnamasi Yogamaya Devi Ki Jai Shri Gopi Swar Mahadeva Ki Jai Sarva Bhishta Pradata Giriraj Govardhana Ki Jai. Grantara Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Shri Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Sudarshan Chakrajiu Ki Jai. Bhakti Vigna Vinashana Shri Nrsingadev Ki Jai. Bhakta Prabhu Shri Prahlad Maharaj Ki Jai. Charodam Charu Sampradaya Charu Acharya Ki Jai. Akara Mataraj Shri Chaitanya Mat Ki Jai. Or Ananya Shakamat Samuha Ki Jai. Shri Vishva Vaishnava Raj Sabha Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Tribhuvana Pavana Harinam Sankirtana Ki Jai. Tribhuvana Mangala Harinam Prabhu Ki Jai. Hare Krishna Maha Mantra Ki Jai. Jai Shri Sachinandana Gaura Hari Ki Jai. Shri Nityananda Mahajana Ki Jai. Shri Pancha Tattva Ki Jai. Virachandra, yes? His appearance. The son of Lord Nityananda.
And Shri Gurudev.
And yes. So also today is the appearance day of Shri Virachandra Prabhu, who is the son of Lord Nityananda Prabhu and Vasudha. Yes? Janava and Vasudha. Vasudha Devi. So we'll also hear a little section. You have the book? Yeah. We'll hear a little section about him. And today, of course, is the transcendental appearance day of Nityalila Pravishtom Vishnupad Paramahansa Asto Tarasata Sri Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Goswami Maharaj, my beloved Siksha Gurudev. So, Nitai Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bol. Before I begin, did anyone want to speak anything about Srila Sridhar Maharaj? Had you had any desire to do that? Okay, okay. And
Vaikanas
Vaikanas Maharaj will say a few words.
Jai Govinda Prabhu, you want to speak something on Sridhar?
So, but Maharaj, Vaikanas Maharaj, when do you want to speak something?
Oh, let some others speak, and then just before you speak, I'll say a little bit.
That'll be in 20 minutes.
Or less.
I'm not going to speak very much.
In 20 minutes or
Okay,
less.
20 minutes.
Okay, or less. Hari?
Do we have another one of those rolling chairs out there for JP? You can bring it.
He's already on it.
JP, come on in here.
Yeah.
Stay behind the curtain.
So today is particularly, for me, it is a very, very important day. I know that very few had the darshan of Srila Sridhar Maharaj. I don't think anyone else here directly met him.
Is that Padmanabha?
Well, we know about that, but I'm talking about the direct darshan, or also having heard directly from him, or having taken initiation from him like that. So I'm the only one, correct? Nobody else. So, but I have a desire also to hear the appreciation of others, because I know that all throughout the world, in my travels, I've met devotees who never met him, but have told me many times, in many occasions, that they consider him to be their Siksha Guru. By reading his books in particular, yes, their heart became completely captured. I know that Rangalata Devi, she has some special consideration of her relationship with Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj. So, but I also have, there's so much to speak, and it's always a dilemma. Actually, whenever I'm there, which I usually am, in Braj on this day, you know, then the numbers over the years of devotees who had direct association with Srila Sridhar Maharaj or took initiation from him dwindled over the years who were coming to the Kartik Brajmandala Prikrama, you know. But when Gurudev was with us, there were many devotees, and I used to have to make a whole list to enable so many of them to speak. We had some direct disciples and many senior devotees, Tirthapada Prabhu and others, who had lots of association with Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj. And Gurudev would always appoint me as the master of ceremonies on that day and on Prabhupada's disappearance day to make up a list and then to call on the devotees in a particular order like that. But in the more recent years, it's kind of my slot. And on that day, I'm always in a dilemma. What to extract, what to select to present to the devotees, because as soon as I start reading any of his books, like this morning, I started looking over and examining Sri Guru and His Grace, which I feel is one of the most important books of all time. And I've read it hundreds of times, but then I'm looking at it and should I read this to the devotees? And then I read a bit more. Oh, I should read this. And I get halfway through the book, just doing an overview, and I realize, everyone just has to read this book. I can't do it justice. And that's not the only book. All of them fall into this. You know, some very special sections of different books, which I've tried to take deeply into my heart, like the Lord's Loving Search for His Lost Servant. Have you heard of that book before? You know, that is so amazing. And there's a chapter there, which is probably the all-time classic presentation I've ever heard on the subject matter of Tate Nukampam Susamikshamana. It's called, the chapter is titled, The Environment. And what Srila Sridhar Maharaj presents there, it's so amazing. Actually, that's one of his main topics. One of his main topics is to speak about this point. How do we operate our spiritual lives in the midst of so many challenges and obstacles and difficulties, which everyone has to face. But what should be our mood? What should be our temperament? So I'll select that topic to present to the devotees. But like I say, it's always a dilemma, but I also like to tell about my own story and how I met Srila Sridhar Maharaj the first time and what led up to that and what came after that, you know, because my whole life, my whole spiritual life has been so deeply affected by Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar. He's my savior. He is absolutely my savior. And I can tell so much about that, how he saved my spiritual life. So anyway, before I begin, I'd like to call on a couple of the devotees who would like to speak something about Srila Sridhar Maharaj. So in what order, I don't know. Nanda Gopal Prabhu, he wanted to speak something. Kanis Maharaj wants to speak a little bit later. Did you want to say anything, Maharaj, at all?
I didn't have a personal association. I only know him through his books.
Yeah, that's okay. So does he. Yeah. Hansagati, Prabhu.
Yes.
Okay. Why don't you come and sit here, and you can say something, and then after that, Nanda Gopal Prabhu. Let me ask you a question about the devotees sitting in the room. How many of you have read his books? A lot of them?
All of them.
A lot of them? Yeah. Yeah. These two, no?
I have not, but I have been hearing so many glories. And
Okay.
I have an extra copy.
Wait, did you say you've heard so many glories?
I've heard so many glories in the book, but I just haven't
Oh, the books.
done the book.
Okay.
I've heard you speak a lot. But
Yeah.
Yeah. Because we also had his disappearance day while I've been here.
My Dandavat pranams to Sri Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada and all his god brothers, and particularly Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj and all the devotees here. When ISKCON was going through turmoil and we weren't really sure what path to go on, because without a captain the ship doesn't sail very well, and Srila Prabhupada left our physical presence. And then I noticed many of the devotees who weren't vying for leadership, but they were leading sannyasis and householders who were serious about devotion and were expressing a lot of need to straighten things out in the movement. They began going to Sridhar Maharaj. And even though I hadn't, at that time when I first heard someone going to him, I was in Kathmandu, and there was one German devotee there who was praising Sridhar Maharaj a lot, and I realized, yeah, he's praiseworthy. He's a Mahabhagavat. So it was really good. And just by hearing his name and reading through some of his books, I can feel he's part of the entourage of pure devotees that Krishna is sending to this material world. And I feel very blessed to have access to now study him more deeply, and in the association of these devotees like Padmanabha Maharaj, who has so many stories of bhavas to express about the bhava of Srila Sridhar Maharaj, I should say. And thank you very much for coming together here. Hare Krishna.
Jnanatamrandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmitam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurve Namaha Gurve Gora Chandraya Radhikaya Tadalaya Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tadabhaktaya Namo Namaha Shri Chaitanya Mano Bhistam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Om Vrindaya Tulsi Devai Priyaye Kesavasacha Krishna Bhakti Prajadevi Sachivachaya Namo Namaha Vanchakalpa Trivyascha Kripa Sindhu Bevacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Giradhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Everyone, Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare. Offer my respectful obeisances unto the lotus feet of my beloved Gurudev Ashtatar Satasisi-Mad Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj, to my beloved Shiksha Gurus, beginning with His Divine Grace, Ashtotar Satasisi-Mad Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada, and especially on this day to His Divine Grace, Ashtotar Satasisi-Mad Srila Bhakti Rakshak Srila Sridhar Goswami Maharaj, and all of our beloved Rupanuga Guru Varga. For my respectful obeisances unto our Chidandi Sannyasgan, Shripad Bhaktivedanta Padmanabha Maharaj and Shripad Bhaktivedanta Vaikanas Maharaj, and to all of the senior Vaishnavas, Srila Prabhupada disciples, and disciples of all of our beloved gurus in our holy line coming from Lord Krishna himself. So today, a very special day also to the son of Sri Nityananda Prabhu and Vasudha Devi. Today is his appearance day. Virachandra. As Sri Padmanabha Maharaj was saying, I had many experiences during the months of Kartik, year after year, and I always remember that Srila Gurudev made this a very important day, and he appointed Maharaj to head it up and organize all the devotees, and I remember, rapidly, listening to all of the different talks that they gave, and how each had very similar but also different perspectives, and how much they glorified Srila Sridhar Maharaj, and how much affection they had for them, and how much affection Srila Gurudev had by doing something like this so regularly, practically all day, many times. And the devotees all spoke so nicely. I remember back from the days when I first heard about Sridhar Maharaj, how glorious he was, but it was just right shortly afterwards that ISKCON decided to ban him. And that I would consider one of the greatest travesties in our modern era of Vaishnavism, this concept of banning, any pure Vaishnavas or any Vaishnavas at all. Anyone who's a Vaishnava is elevated soul, what to speak of those in the likes of Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj. And I remember that a letter was circulated telling everyone about this banning, and there were some criticisms going around. And at that time, Hansaduta Swami, he was one of the GBCs, and he wrote a letter to all the GBCs, and he requested them, okay, if you don't want his association, that's one thing, but it is a great offense to criticize devotees of this nature, so please don't do this, was his request. And I remember that, so I missed my chance back then to get an opportunity by following that policy. At that time, I wasn't quite ready or having the strong desire to go to India anyway, to be honest. But I really feel like I missed out, because if ISKCON had embraced him instead of banning him, we would have all gotten the opportunity to hear more from him and learn about him. So that was unlucky at that time. But due to the grace of Srila Gurudev and this Sangha that we're in now, he honors all Vaishnavas and all of the devotees in the line, the disciples of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And our Srila Prabhupada, at that time, we began to learn further on, a little bit later. Especially one time I went to San Jose, because I used to know dear Krishna Swami, and he became a Shiksha disciple and sannyas, right, Maharaj? By Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj, and he had an ashram in San Jose. And in some of those interim, so many gurus were coming down, and there was a lot of upheaval and turmoil in ISKCON, so we started traveling around here and there, and I happened to go and spend some time there. And I saw, well, this is very nice. It's different, but it's similar. And I got to start to learn more about Srila Sridhar Maharaj from there, and I had some attraction. And then coming here to New Braj, then I met Maharaj, back then Urakram Prabhu. And I think at that time also there was some, misconception, not coming from Maharaj, but some devotees, they become, super enthusiastic when they get a new guru, and they may in some ways be over enthusiastic. And there was some words going around like, oh, Prabhupada came and he gave the soup, but now Srila Sridhar Maharaj is coming and he's giving the salt. And that, for me, gave a little bit like, it felt like a minimization of Srila Prabhupada, and it was hard to tolerate. But I just let it sit, and over time, these things became more clear and understood, especially due to Gurudev's teachings and how we could understand that undoubtedly Srila Prabhupada gave everything when his book is in his books, but in a hidden way where we need help to understand them and to grow with them. And that's what Srila Maharaj was doing, that's what Srila Gurudev was doing, and what all pure Vaishnavas do. They all illuminate on what has previously been given. So for that, and I've learned so much more about Srila Maharaj, read many of his books and heard from many of the exalted devotees that tell so many of his glories. I know how Srila Prabhupada felt that he was so close. He was his dear god brother, and Srila Maharaj lived with him for many months during also, they had turmoil in the Gaudiya Math. Just like we've seen turmoil so many times in different situations, but at that time they were like bosom friends, and Srila Prabhupada made that famous statement, he is your Shiksha Guru. He is my Shiksha Guru. What to speak that he's your Shiksha Guru. That's how Srila Prabhupada saw him, and he invited him in the beginning, come and you will be the president of our society. And he always took so much help from him, and Srila Maharaj also always stood so strongly behind our Prabhupada. When other god brothers in the Gaudiya Math would criticize him, Srila Maharaj would stand up for him and say, yes, he is everything that is claimed to be. They wanted to call him Prabhupada, and he explained so many things to them to help them understand the glories of our Srila Prabhupada. So in every way, he's been a shining light in our Gaudiya line. I have just to give an example, I was going to read a few pages of some of his nectarian words from the book, The Golden Volcano of Divine Love. That's how he liked to explain Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, like a golden mountain, a golden volcano. And I thought this is kind of also very appropriate because many of these things in here tie into our Kartik Vrat and the many pastimes that we hear about from Vrindavan Leelas. And we'll be able to see the unique characteristic of the way that he writes and the way he presents things. It is very touching. So he begins by saying this chapter, which I'm reading a portion of, is called A Drop of Divine Love. If we analyze the very basis of surrender, we must ask, where does surrender begin? In full surrender, there are no rights. Whenever any rights are established, surrender becomes unnecessary. We cannot think, we must fight for our innate rights. To a certain extent, we may try for our rights in this world, but in Krishna's pastimes, this mentality has no place. All rights reserved. Even the goddess of fortune, Lakshmi Devi, cannot enter there. What to speak of others? It is inconceivable. Krishna is not under any law or within anyone's fist. All rights reserved. Everything is his sweet will, but he is absolute good. That is our solace. We cannot enter his domain as a matter of right. Even Lord Brahma, Lord Shiva, and Lakshmi Devi cannot enter there. But still, if we take the path chalked out by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we can enter and achieve a position there. So we've all been hearing during our Kartik Vrat different, pastimes, and we've heard how difficult Lord Shiva tried to enter as a gopi, but he got stopped. Lakshmi Devi wanted to become a gopi, and she got stopped. Actually, Lord Shiva got in, he became Gopishwar Mahadev, but he couldn't enter directly right into the Ras dance. And Lakshmi Devi, this is such a great story. When we go to Bailvan, that's the place where she came, and it's described there in that place. She's been doing austerities for millions and millions of years with the desire to enter the Ras dance. But she never has been able to because she's not willing to do what's necessary. But here Srila Sridhar Maharaj has explained that if we take the path chalked out by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, then we can enter and achieve a position there. So it's just, if you can do it, then you can get it. It is so dear, so rare, so valuable and desirable. We must look for the magnanimity of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, which is aspired for by Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva. They are praying for a drop of mercy, but Lord Chaitanya brought that here in a flood and inundated everyone with that nectar, a drop of which is rarely to be had or even thought of. We must approach his mercy with such an attitude of hankering and expectation. His gift is so great and magnanimous, who can understand it? With 2 verses of Srimad Bhagavatam, one from the mouth of Krishna himself and the next from the mouth of Uddhava, he takes us straight to that highest place, eliminating so many external things. Krishna says, Na tata me priyatma atma yonir na sankara. O Uddhava, neither Brahma, nor Shiva, nor Baladev, nor Lakshmi, nor even my very self are as dear to me as you are. This is past time we discuss about with Sri Govardhan Puja and the different devotees that are considered to be the highest, and Uddhava being one of them. So this is describing that one of the positions of why Uddhava is considered to be one of the highest devotees, actually second. But then, what does Uddhava say? Even though he's glorified by Krishna as being, higher than everyone, Uddhava says, Asam maho charna renu, jusha maham sham, vrindavane kim api gulam leto sadadinu. The gopis of Vrindavan have given up the association of their husbands, sons, and other family members who are very difficult to renounce, and they have sacrificed even their religious principles to take the shelter of the lotus feet of Krishna, which are sought after even by the Vedas. Oh, grant me the fortune to be born as a blade of grass in Vrindavan, so that I may take the dust of those great souls upon my head. So we can see from hearing this why Uddhava is considered one of the 3 Haridasas. The progressive march towards divinity. The gradation of theism can be traced from Lord Brahma, the creator of the universe, to Krishna's intimate friend Uddhava in Dwarka. And Uddhava takes us directly to Vrindavan to reveal the highest devotion, eliminating various aspects in our progressive march towards divinity. His writing is so profound, and you think eliminating the various prospects in our progressive march towards divinity. We have to march on, and the way is that of surrender, of loving devotion, not mere formal devotion. Superior to the spiritual realm of Vaikuntha is Mathura. Maharaj has been speaking so much about Mathura Mandala the last few nights. Very, very illuminating Katha. Superior to the spiritual realm of Vaikuntha is Mathura, where Sri Krishna first appears. Superior to Mathura is the Vrindavan forest, where Krishna enjoyed the Ras dance. Better still is Govardhan Hill, which was the site of even more confidential pastimes of love. But best of all is Radhakund, which is situated at the foot of Govardhan Hill and holds the supreme position because it is overflooded with the nectar of the highest kind of divine love. Who is acquainted with the science of devotion who will not aspire for the divine service of Srimati Radharani at Radhakund? The last section now. As we all know these pastimes somewhat externally, and we hear about them so much during Kartik, all the different places and their levels of devotion. But Srila Sridhar Maharaj makes such an important point coming here now. He heads this as the heart of Krishna. We must place our faith in these subtle things. Only through faith of a finer order can we be led to the highest quarter. The highest conception is in the heart of Krishna, and we have to enter into the heart of Krishna, not any other place. Although Krishna's conjugal pastimes with the gopis, Madhurya Leela, are supreme, they cannot stand alone. There are many other things which are present in his pastimes. Krishna's pastimes with his friends and parents are essential in supporting his pastimes of amorous love. Conjugal love is, of course, the main thing, but still it is dependent on the other paraphernalia of Krishna's pastimes. There must be Krishna's family and friends and all the different groups of servitors. Even the environment of Vrindavan itself also has its valuable part to play. That's another famous quote by Srila Maharaj. He always says the environment is always favorable. So in this case, he's saying even the environment of Vrindavan itself has its valuable part to play. And what is Vrindavan? The sands of the river Jamuna, the jungle, the birds, peacocks and deer, the cows, cowboys, and caves of Govardhan Hill, the motherly relatives. Everything is there, and it is well designed and most suitable for the pastimes of Sri Krishna. Vrindavan is necessary for the pastimes of Radha and Govinda. When Radharani meets Krishna in Kurukshetra, her mind runs to Vrindavan. She thinks, Krishna is here, and I am also here, but her mind runs to Vrindavan. In Kurukshetra, Srimati Radharani is hankering for the environment of Vrindavan. She wants to have Sri Krishna's company there. All of Krishna's paraphernalia and divine associates have their own unique value, and that cannot be eliminated. Radha Govinda cannot be taken away from Vrindavan any more than Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu can be taken away from Navadvip. The whole thing is a system. One part cannot be snatched away from the other parts. All the devotees have a necessary part to play in order to create the harmony of Krishna's pastimes. Otherwise, it would not be living, but dead, artificial, useless. It cannot even be imagined. Krishna Leela is an organic whole. Srimati Radharani says, my mind is running straight towards Vrindavan. I have the main object of pleasure, Krishna himself, but it is useless without the favorable paraphernalia of Vrindavan. So Radharani's pain of separation rises to the highest point in Kurukshetra, where she has attained the object of reunion after a long separation. There, Krishna is very close, but without being surrounded by the favorable paraphernalia of Vrindavan, she cannot have the real advantage of union. In this way, Bhaktivinoda Thakur has explained the mood of Srimati Radharani in Kurukshetra. So we can see also, so we would wonder that saying the environment is always favorable, so yet here Radharani is in Vrindavan and Kurukshetra. But it seems on one hand it's not favorable, but on another hand it's favorable because, especially for the devotee, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur has said himself, I want to have a kunja in Kurukshetra, and there I will serve my mistress. There is the highest place of separation, and Srimati Radharani there is in the greatest need. So I want to go there and serve her in that place. So, Srila Bhakti Raksha Sridhar Maharaj, you can all see and hear from reading some of his divine words, what an eloquent scholar he is, and as much as we can, we should try to embrace his nectarian words, try to follow his instructions, and glorify him today on this special day of his birthday. And I know his mood being the same as Srila Gurudev, our Srila Prabhupada, our whole Rupanuga Varga on this day, we glorify all of our Rupanuga Varga and give honor to them for bringing this highest conception of Sri Vrindavan Dham, Mathura Mandala, Braj Mandala. And all glories to Srila Bhakti Raksha Sridhar Maharaj.
Jai.
All glories to Srila Gurudev, Srila Prabhupada, all of our Rupanuga Guru Varga.
remarkable.
Oh, no.
I didn't do it.
Oh, yeah, you
I did.
You want to sit in the chair?
I want to sit right here. I want to fight for the lower ground.
Good.
Maybe that's what I'm saying. Sure, Raj.
Or a little different direction? You said backward pushing then.
Yeah, but also that saying, fight for the lower
Yeah.
ground. Yeah, backwards pushing.
Yeah.
Huh?
Put it where you want.
But you stand up,
Yeah, I
just
have
tighten
to
it out, tighten it out.
Good. Not too tight though.
All right, that's good.
We're really good.
Let's just do this bad boy.
Crush it.
Om Ganatimanandasya Jnananjanaslakaya Chakshurmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurudev Namaha Gurudev Gurachandraya Radhikaya Tadalaye Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tadbhaktaya Namo Namaha Oyam pravajantam anupeta apeta krityam kapaino viraha katara ajuhava putreti tannataya tarvo vinidus tam savabhutam hridayam murimanatusmi bhaktya vihina padadalakshay kirtascha kamari tarangamadye kripamai tvam saranam prapannam Vrinde namaste charanarvindam Tave vasmi na jivani tvaya vina Iti vidyaya radhe Tamrayanam charanandike Pancha kapatarubhascha kripa sindhuvevacha Patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. So on this auspicious day of the appearance of Srila Srila Goswami Maharaj, we beg permission to say a few words in his praise, begging permission from our Diksha Guru, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, from our Shiksha and Sannyas Guru, Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayana Goswami Maharaj, from our exalted Rupanuga Guru Varga. We beg all their blessings and thank them for this opportunity. This is a special day. Everybody's speaking from their own perspective, their own experiences about how they understand the contribution, the mission, the lineage, the personality and qualities of Bhaktivinoda Srila Goswami Maharaj. Srila Gurudev always made the point, actually he taught us how to glorify a great personality. And it was very important to identify the lineage and what line are they coming. Also to identify their speciality, their mission, their manubishta. And then everything else will follow from that. And it's already been stated in previous speakers how Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj is so important and so prominent in our line. The history of his coming to Gaudiya Math is well known. You can see that in the biography of Bhakti Keshav Maharaj. There's a selection where Srila Sridhar Maharaj offers his own experience, where he had heard some of the preachers coming to his village and became curious to hear from these great Vaishnavas. So he went to the Gaudiya Math in Mayapur. But he has a certain nature, very inquisitive nature. He described it himself that he simply wanted to listen. Although he is vastly learned himself, coming from a very high-class Brahmin family, and like many of the very special associates of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada, obviously associates that had come with him for many, many lifetimes. These are eternal associates. Personalities like Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj, like our Srila Prabhupada, like Bhakti Keshav Maharaj, they are always with Srila Saraswati Prabhupada, and they make their appearance at different times in order to assist him. And he came from a high-class family, very educated in religion, and he was highly educated. At that time in India, it was very rare for Indian men to be able to have access to university education. Only people from the best families and the most intelligent were gained access, and he studied law. And law was a very reserved for a very small percentage of people who actually went to university. And that also presages his special qualities as capable of debate, philosophical discussion, establishing principles. He also, prior to the study of law, he studied religion, philosophy of the West, very well educated in the Western culture. And this was to serve him very well in his service to the mission of Guru Maharaj, and was also to serve our own Srila Prabhupada, because Srila Prabhupada being tasked with the mission of going to the West, he had a special relationship with Srila Sridhar Maharaj, and Srila Sridhar Maharaj, especially even after the disappearance of Srila Prabhupada took him as his Shiksha Guru, and he taught him many things about Western culture, Western philosophy, and argument that would be required in order to succeed in preaching. How does the Western mind think? You have to understand how somebody thinks in order to be able to understand how to present philosophy to them. And so it's kind of ironic because sometimes in his later years, Srila Sridhar Maharaj, he was very retiring. He stayed in his place in Navadvip, but during his younger years, he was a very, very active preacher, traveling everywhere and traveling with a number of different godbrothers. And he was highly, highly regarded amongst them, highly regarded by Srila Saraswati Prabhupada, such that he was given his title. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada would give titles to his exceptional devotees that marked and described their speciality in seva, in service. And he was given the name Bhakti Rakshak, which means the protector of the conceptions of devotion, because his philosophical understanding and acuity were so precise and so comprehensive and so spot on that Srila Prabhupada felt very comfortable that no matter what, we have one person who will preserve these principles. And such that later, when the Gaudiya Math began to break up, those disciples that our Srila Prabhupada described as the ones that understood and followed the order of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada, they rallied together and they chose Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj as the leader of their group, that you should be the Acharya of our group. And they worked together for some time, but Srila Sridhar Maharaj, seeing the extraordinary capacity of each of these personalities, like Bhakti Keshav Maharaj, like Bhakti Madhav Maharaj, and others, told them all, oh, you should all start your own missions. You should all do your own mission because you're also capable and competent. And yet, even though they did have their own missions, throughout the years, all of them maintained a very close and abiding relationship, very cooperative. And even though there may have been separate institutions in one sense, in terms of heart and mind, purpose, direction, and unity, they maintained very, very close relationships. But Srila Sridhar Maharaj was always very senior and very respected personality who everyone would come to for advice, to reconcile some differences. In later years, when our Srila Prabhupada was trying to get land in Mayapur, it was very difficult at that time. The communists controlled the area. They're making it very difficult to get the land. But Bhakti Madhav Maharaj, she was very powerful and had a lot of influence in that area. And so Srila Prabhupada had asked him to help to get some land. But Srila Prabhupada had said some things, very strong things about Gaudiya Math in general, which had upset Bhaktivedanta Maharaj a bit. Because Srila Prabhupada was very critical that they couldn't cooperate together, and they're just in their mats ringing bells. It was an internal argument, but he stated it, and of course we as disciples were highly critical and immature, and we developed a negative attitude about Gaudiya Math because of that. And so Bhaktivedanta Maharaj was a little reluctant to help. And Bhakti Sri Maharaj called him and they spoke about it, and he said, you should help Swamiji get his land. And Bhaktivedanta Maharaj said, he says that we're just ringing bells. And if you know the history of Bhaktivedanta Maharaj, he was a powerful, active preacher. He did so many things throughout his lifetime. You can read the books of Bhaktivedanta Maharaj and find that out. So Sri Maharaj, he heard him and he understood his mood, but then he said, so he said, he's saying that we just ring bells. And Sri Maharaj said, but to ring the bells in Swamiji's worldwide Sankirtan mission, what a glorious thing that would be. And Bhaktivedanta Maharaj, very soft-hearted Vaishnava, he immediately melted and said, all right, yes, I will help you. And thus, they got the land. So, people don't know that or talk about that, but, Bhakti Rakshak Sri Maharaj was instrumental in establishing that, this Mayapur Chandrodaya Mandir, that is one of the worldwide centers of Srila Prabhupada. And actually, his position, he is one of the great acharyas who can be known as universal guru. And you may not see it based on what he appeared to accomplish directly in his lifetime in setting up missions and temples everywhere, but you see it instead through the impact he had through his literatures. And later by those who followed him, who spread so many of his teachings in so many countries in the world. But really, it's the literature that I want to focus on briefly, and how it affected me. And thus, I think my story is very similar to people all around the world. Because, as has been alluded to before, after Srila Prabhupada disappeared, there's a period where Bhakti Sri Maharaj was being shunned by the ISKCON authorities. In fact, I was in a room just after the very first meetings with Srila Sri Maharaj by some of the prominent ISKCON gurus, and they were talking in a very negative way about him. And at that time, I didn't know anything. I didn't know his position. I didn't know whether to feel hurt, good, bad, or what. But it created a somewhat negative impression in my heart about him. But it was only a year or two later when other devotees were going to visit him, and then were bringing back transcripts of the conversations they had with him. Some of them later became books about the issues of Guru Tattva, the transition from one acharya to the next, and then just general philosophy. And I began to read those, and immediately my mind and heart changed. And I could understand that this was a big mistake. And yet, probably because of the offense of having those negative feelings earlier, or maybe bad association, or who knows, previous lifetimes, did not get that association. And like many others, were kind of cast adrift from ISKCON, and without association of devotees, pretty much fell out of devotional practice, living in Hawaii. And also because of negative association, actually having big doubts in my heart. What was real, what was not? Because what we were hearing that Srila Prabhupada taught was being distorted through the mouths and the voices of people that were severely misrepresenting his conceptions. And I was really being a little to touch the jiva, I was floating back and forth on the edge, maybe about to tumble off. And then one of my godbrothers, whose wife had family in Hawaii, Judamanu, remember Judamanu? You know, I knew him. We were friends. He's a good friend. He showed up very near where I lived in Maui, and he gave me a book. The book. Sri Guru and His Grace.
Jai ho.
And I read it. I was curious to read it, but I read it, and it was like a light had been turned on. And all the doubts, all the misconceptions, all the fears, and everything about Srila Prabhupada was completely straightened out. Everything that I had thought that was correct and pure and proper about Srila Prabhupada was completely reinforced, and my faith is restored. Just like Padmanabha Maharaj said, he saved him. He saved so many of us. Some by direct association, some by the association of his instruction, his Vani. Non-different. And this is part of the plan. Obviously, he could not go everywhere. But his books, and we owe a great debt. It's kind of ironic that many of the godbrothers that were instrumental in bringing Srila Sridhar Maharaj's words to the world, they became inimical to many of us and to our relationship with Srila Narayan Maharaj. And yet still, we have to acknowledge a great debt and hope that their mentality changes, because what they've done for the world by presenting these books, you can't be measured. It cannot be measured. And then there are so many books. Sri Krishna, Reality the Beautiful, The Golden Volcano, so many others. What is that? The angels, something of the angels?
Follow the angels.
Follow the angels. And so there's a point that I wanted to make, that in all of our devotional lives, we're all going to come to a point of crisis and doubt. For different reasons. It's part of the purification process. It's part of the test that we all have to go through. And the only way to rise above that and get beyond that is by taking association of these personalities, these guiding lights. And Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj was chosen by the Lord to be such a guiding light through his books and his words. And you have to also fly your own plane. This is what Srila Prabhupada used to say, that you can take lessons, you know, how to fly. You're going to be with a person, you're a co-pilot, but one day you have to fly your own plane, which means at some point you have to use your free will and make the right choices. You can't rely on the choices and the statements of others. Of course, Mahabhagavats, but to find the right people to associate, the right path to follow, you will have to make your own choice. And these words, these guiding principles were so important. But even in our own Sangha, and in the Sangha of Bhakti Sridhar Maharaj, there were people that were trying to divide and keep us away from each other. There was a time in Hawaii when they were trying, disciples of Bhakti Sridhar Maharaj were saying something about the position of Gadadhar Pandit that seemed to be opposite of what Srila Gurudev was saying. Gadadhar Pandit being Srimati Radhika herself. And some of what the words of Srila Sridhar Maharaj are quoted in this book, Follow the Angels. And there he refers to Gadadhar Pandit to be like a beggar. Right, to be like a beggar. And these devotees came up with the idea that Gadadhar Pandit had lost all of his potency, that Sri Krishna had taken that for himself. And they were saying that this is the teachings of Srila Sridhar Maharaj. And Gurudev, of course, refuted. He said, you're following me, you're taking my mood, does that mean I've lost my own potency and my own mood? He said, no. And he gave many arguments. And there were groups that were thinking the wrong conception on both sides. And so some were criticizing Srila Sridhar Maharaj unjustly for an opinion that someone that did not understand the words of their own guru was expressing. That's the point. That sometimes immature followers of a particular great acharya will express an opinion of what that guru's presentation is all about. What is his conception? What is his manubhishta? but it's only on their own level of realization. And so at that time, we had that book in Bangalore. We were there, I think we were there, it was maybe 2004. And we began to read that book, and we read that beautiful description of Srila Sridhar Maharaj about Gadadhar Pandit. And having been already illuminated by Gurudev about Gadadhar Pandit, we found absolutely no contradiction at all. Not even a drop, but rather we found a very sweet speciality in the way he described it. It was very, very beautiful. And that's the thing about Srila Sridhar Maharaj. When you read these words, when you hear these books, it sounds like some English poet has edited them. His command of the English language was not just precise, but it was eloquent and poetic in a way that I've never heard anyone, even English speakers, speak. And uplifting and soaring language that when you hear it, the heart, seeks to follow that kind of language. Phrases like, it cannot but be. You're going to hear these things when Padmanabha speaks because, they'll just come out. There's so many of them. But I just want to say a couple more words, and then I'm going to end, because actually any of us could, even though I didn't have direct association, I could go on for hours. But I'm not going to. I just want to say one thing, that having read those books, having taken shelter of those books at that time, it kept me alive. And then when I met Srila Gurudev for the first time, I'd seen him in 1977, but I never met him. And then came to him, and then in 1997, went to the Parikram. And as was the case with many disciples of Srila Prabhupada, we had fallen away from our practice, weren't chanting our mantras, and Gurudev would reinstall us in these mantras. And it was this day in Vrindavan, the appearance day of Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj, that he was going to do this. And he asked me, because so many devotees at that time had been followers of Srila Sridhar Maharaj. Uddhava was there, Pran, Champakalata, you, so many others. Yeah, Tirthapada. And he asked me, because these were all my friends, did I have any relationship? And I said, not personally, but I read his books and they saved me. And Gurudev was overjoyed to hear that. It was as if, it was non-different. And he said, oh, very good, very good. Then you will do a fire yoga this day, and by Swamiji's grace coming down, you will be restored, or reinstalled. But he was very happy that it was on this day. The appearance day of Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj. Because Srila Gurudev had a deep and abiding relationship with as well. And why not? Because he was in the line, the sannyas line of Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj. You can hear that story from Padmanabha Maharaj, it's very amazing. But his own guru had so much faith in Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj to impart the mantra given from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada. That shows the esteem in which he is held in our line, and especially by Gurudev, because Gurudev's dedication to his own guru, and thus to whomever his own guru had faith and trust and was dear to him. So, there are parties that try to create this idea that Gurudev was some kind of enemy of Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj, but every Navadvip Parikrama time, Bhakti Bhagavan Keshav Maharaj would go to visit Srila Sridhar Maharaj and offer respects and have beautiful conversations. And after his disappearance, Srila Gurudev went every year with his godbrothers, right? So Gurudev gave me the gift of acknowledging my indebtedness and my connection with Srila Sridhar Maharaj. And I would therefore add for everyone here to take that conception very deep into your heart, that we can connect with these persons through their books. That's why these books are printed. And particularly those books recommended by our own guru. And understanding the relationship, they're not different, these persons, in terms of their affinity and their mood and their following and their affection and their generosity to the living entities and to the ongoing mission of Srila Prabhupada, and then given to him by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada, given to him by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. These are not separate missions. This is one line, and they are all part of that same family. And if you want to understand this family in a very wonderful way, to broaden your appreciation and to broaden your ability to convey it to others, read these extraordinary books. Read these extraordinary books about Sri Maharaj. And your life will, there'll be transformation and wonderful addition. And so I offer my great gratitude and respects to him on this day. Very grateful, as Bhakti Vigyan Bharti Maharaj instructed, very important that we honor the Vaishnavas on these days by speaking about them or by hearing about them, and seek their blessings. This is a day when they are very generous, and we can get special blessings. So I just conclude by saying all glories to Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Swami Maharaj, the very dear friend and Shiksha Guru of my Diksha Guru Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada.
Haribol.
Back to the kitchen.
Back in the kitchen.
Get out of here. No, come back. No, don't go.
Oh, they did start my things.
Nitya's giving you some.
I may be back sooner.
Nitya's getting some already.
Great water.
I have a couple of these in Los Angeles I can bring that are good, almost like new.
Well, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah, microphone stands, yeah.
All right. You remember Mahaprabhu? He would be always called near the beginning, right? And I remember that, like, sometimes he would be speaking, and he would speak like all, like pastimes of Sri Maharaj, and then Gurudev would say, I wanted to hear Katha. And then the next time he would speak, he would speak Katha, and then Gurudev would say, oh, I wanted to hear more stories and pastimes.
No, I'm just using it like each other.
Yeah.
Sure.
So it was very wonderful to hear. I'm very glad that we have these few devotees who wanted to speak something. Each spoke something very significant and helpful for me to also remember. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamin Iti Namane. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Goswamin Iti Namane. Namo Vishnupadaya Radhikai Priyatmane Shri Srimad Bhakti Vedanta Narayan Iti Namane. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Namo Mahabhadanaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namane Gaura Trishe Namaha. Nityanandam Namastubhyam Premananda Pradayane Kalo Kalmashanashaya Janava Pataye Namaha. Panchatattvatmakam Krishnam Bhakta Rupa Swarupakam Bhakta Avataram Bhaktakyam Namami Bhakta Shaktikam. He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute. Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Brindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye. Brindai Tulsi Debai Priyai Keshavasya Cha Krishna Bhakti Prade Devi Satyavachai Namo Namaha. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivas Adi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. So first of all, I'm offering my unlimited Dandavat pranams and my Shraddha Pushpanjali at the lotus feet of my most worshipable, beloved Gurudev, Nitya Lila Pravishta, Om Vishnupad Paramahansa, Ashtotarasata Sri Srila, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada. And then I'm offering my same unlimited Dandavat pranams and my Shraddha Pushpanjali at the lotus feet of my most worshipable, beloved Siksha Gurudevs. Nitya Lila Pravishta Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Asto Tarasata Sri Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Goswami Maharaj. And Nitya Lila Pravishta Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Asto Tarasata Sri Srila Bhakti Vedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj. And my Dandavat pranams to all of my Sri Rupa Nuga Guru Varga. And my Dandavat pranams to all the Vaishnavas and all the Vaishnavis. So Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Goswami Maharaj is one of the most important contemporary acharyas in our disciplic line in this modern day. We know that our disciplic succession is filled with so many luminaries. When we hear the names of all of our Guru Parampara, and we also sing the song composed by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, the Guru Parampara song, beginning with Krishna, Lord Brahma, Narada, Vyasadeva, all of the whole disciplic line, coming down to the Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's time, and then coming down to the present era of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and so many of his disciples. We see that this disciplic succession is the highest pedigree that is possible for any jiva to come into contact with on this earth planet and at this time period in history. Of course, we know that there were many lines of Gaudiya Vaishnavas after the time of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, yes. And there were also even bloodlines, like Virachandra Prabhu, whose appearance day is today. There's a whole lines coming down in Bengal. They call themselves Nityananda Vamsha. You see? There is some dispute also whether or not I think you read that already, correct? I mean, on your own. Whether or not Virachandra Prabhu had offspring. Correct? Did you read that?
Not yet today.
Huh?
I haven't read it yet today.
No, not out loud, but I mean previously. But there are so many lines claiming to be in the direct bloodline of Sri Nityananda Prabhu. You see? Coming down from his son Virachandra. But many of those lines have become caste Goswamis at the present time. Mostly. Jati Gosai. And in Bengal, this is very widespread. People wanting to claim to be in the blood disciplic succession of such personality, direct associates of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, like this. So, Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj, he clarified what is the disciplic succession. He addressed these points, especially to all of us Westerners, after our Srila Prabhupada left the planet. There were many doubts amongst the devotees regarding Guru Tattva, especially. And Srila Prabhupada, when he was approached by his few senior disciples in his final days in Vrindavan, 1977, November, and it appeared that he might be leaving this world. So I was there in Vrindavan at that time, going into Prabhupada's room daily for probably about at least 5 or 6 weeks before Prabhupada departed. But we were going in briefly and doing kirtan seva because Prabhupada wanted Harinam to be chanted throughout the whole wakeful period of his day. And so there were 2-3 devotees quietly chanting with soft kartals in one corner of his room. So we were not there in the room at all times, but whatever thing that was significant, anything that was important that came up during the day that Srila Prabhupada would have said, any topic. So there was at least about 250, 300 Western devotees living in Vrindavan at Krishna Balaram Mandir during that time, including quite a number of Gurukula kids also. So whenever Prabhupada would speak anything of significance, whatever would take place in his room, immediately after, we would be sitting in the vestibule of the guest house, right next to Prabhupada's house, and one of the personal servants, I remember Hari Sari, he would come out and describe to us what Prabhupada said, what had happened, like that. So, on this particular day, the ISKCON leaders, they came to Srila Prabhupada and they expressed their worry, their concern that Srila Prabhupada may be leaving this world. They expressed that to him. And they requested that Srila Prabhupada should personally tell them if there's anyone who he directly is recommending to them for guidance after he leaves this world. So Srila Prabhupada, he mentioned about how he has tried to put everything in his books that is necessary for the devotees. But then he also told them, he said that my god brother, Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj, you can go to him for guidance after I leave. Now, it wasn't the first time that all of us had heard the name of Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj. I was kind of telling this history the other day to Damodar Maharaj. He was asking me how did I meet Srila Sridhar Maharaj and so forth. But for the 7 years, from 1970 till 1977, when Srila Prabhupada departed, the time period from when I joined the movement, I had heard over the years, on a number of occasions, Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj's name mentioned by Srila Prabhupada. You know? And especially, I was telling that in 1975, 2 years before Prabhupada departed, we were in Los Angeles and we were doing this great book marathon to produce the Chaitanya Charitamrita in the summer of 1975. 17 volumes in 2 months, and it's a whole story. But after we completed that seva, anyone who was involved, and there was a lot of devotees involved because Prabhupada ordered, he wanted all of these 17 volumes to be produced in 2 months. And it was miraculous, but Prabhupada ordered it. And so somehow or other the disciples carried it out, even though they had been doing only 1 book every 6 months of Prabhupada's, and they had fallen behind by 17 volumes. So Srila Prabhupada wrote a letter at the end of that 2 months and gave his blessings to all the devotees who were involved. There were so many devotees. And then Ramaswar, who was the BBT secretary at that time, he asked Srila Prabhupada what he would do, because now that his translation and the book production was going so quickly, that if he completes the Srimad Bhagavatam, what will he next translate, his next project? Because all of us thinking that Prabhupada is going to live well into his 100 years and so forth. So he suggested to Prabhupada maybe another great epic like Mahabharata or Vedanta Sutra, like that. And then Prabhupada said, no, those books are not as important to us in terms of bhakti as the books of our Goswamis and the books of our acharyas, Bhakti Vinod Thakur, like that, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. They should all be translated. So then after he asked that question to Srila Prabhupada, then he asked the question, if for some reason, Srila Prabhupada, you are not able to finish the Srimad Bhagavatam before you leave this world, is there anyone else that can do that work that you can recommend? And then Prabhupada, he said, and this was written in the BBT newsletter, I was reading it with my own eyes. Outside of the Los Angeles temple, they had a box with like a bulletin board. And then Srila Prabhupada answered. He said, there are only 2 persons on the planet who can write the purports to the Srimad Bhagavatam in English language, myself and my godbrother, Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj. When I saw that, there was no question whatsoever what his level is. I hadn't met him at that point. There was no way of reading his Katha, there was no books, but we knew of his existence. And so from that day on, it became very clear to me that at some point, I hope and pray that I'll be able to meet this personality, right? But we were still feeling that Srila Prabhupada would remain for so many more years. But that was not to be. After 2 more years, then his final pastimes were manifesting there in Vrindavan. And in that conversation, then he recommended Srila Sridhar Maharaj that you can go to my godbrother, Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj, for guidance. So within days after that, Srila Prabhupada went into Samadhi. Now began a new era, a very interesting time period that for the very first time in the Western world, Srila Prabhupada up to that point was the only guru of the movement of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu for all Western devotees. And he had miraculously accomplished this task of creating this institution, worldwide institution, converting thousands of Westerners to the path of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in all countries around the world, from every single background, culture, language, race, everything. And now he, after training his disciples for 12 years, and in many cases, some of the disciples were only 1 or 2 years or less, very new devotees, 5 years. But now, for the first time in the history of the world, after the disappearance of such a personality, now his disciples, Western-bodied disciples, are going to venture forth to become guru, which was not against what Prabhupada desired. He certainly desired. That's a whole nother topic. On many occasions, Prabhupada told he wants his disciples to also become gurus and so forth. But there was a great confusion that entered the Krishna consciousness movement at that time in what the leaders were representing, what they were representing to the devotees all over the world. That they had been appointed by Srila Prabhupada directly and so forth. Very controversial topics. And within the first couple of years, there was so much chaos. Now, right after our Prabhupada departed in 77, within a few months would be the first Gaur Purnima festival in Mayapur. First time that the leaders of the movement who had been appointed in managerial positions, GBC and so forth, that they would hold their annual GBC meeting in Mayapur without Srila Prabhupada personally being present. So, at that meeting, it was brought up, they discussed how Srila Prabhupada gave this recommendation at the very end, before he departed, that after I leave this world, you can go to my godbrother, Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj. So they made a committee of GBC representatives to go to the mutt of Srila Sridhar Maharaj in Navadvip Dham and to consult with him, to meet him and to hear from him. So they did that, and no one can deny that they did that because they recorded it. And then they transcribed that conversation that they had with him, and they also sent this transcription to every single temple throughout the world. And at that time I was in Kenya, East Africa, and I was there in 1978. We received this, and as I told you already, I already heard what Prabhupada said about Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj, and how he also recommended we can go to him for guidance. So when I received that and I read that, his Katha, which by the way, partly that is also in the book, Sri Guru and His Grace, what Srila Sridhar is speaking. He's speaking to these ISKCON leaders. Not the whole book, but very much of the beginning parts of the book. And when I read this, because I had never heard his Katha before, and when I read this, then I thought, oh, now I understand why Prabhupada, the way that Srila Sridhar Maharaj could answer the questions of the GBC. What was his mood? How he was so ready to give guidance. And what kind of guidance? What vast knowledge. Like we've just heard. This book answers every single question that you could ever have about Guru Tattva. And so many other subject matters as well. So, at that time, a desire came in my heart, very strong desire, that very soon I'm going to go back to India and I'm going to meet this personality, Srila Bhakti Srila. So this was 1978. I spent most of that year there in Kenya. And then after that, I left and came to England. And from England, I flew back to India in 1979. So within a few months of being there in Mayapur, one evening I was walking on the rooftop of these buildings. There was only like 3 buildings there at that time, and rice fields. And we called it the Long Building, because it was just a really long building. So, it's still there now. So, and it was the evening about 5 p.m. and I was chanting japa on the rooftop, and then I ran into my godbrother named Subhag Brahmachari. He's Bengali, and he met Prabhupada in England, kind of early on, around 69, and then he became a member of ISKCON. So I'm there on the rooftop, and I said to him, Subhag, Prabhu, have you ever met this personality, Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj? Because by that time, pretty much everybody had heard his name, you know, and as I said, that transcription went everywhere. And there were also devotees who began to visit with Srila Sridhar Maharaj. So he told me, yes, I have met him. I said, you have? Where is he? He says, well, he has his own temple, his mat, just across the Ganga in Navadvip. I said, he does? Yeah. He said, I go there sometimes and I hear from him. I said, oh, really? Yeah, I want to go. I want to meet him. And he says, okay, I'll bring you there. We can maybe go tomorrow, you know. And then he told me, he said, but one thing, don't tell anyone that we're going there. That was very, very surprising to me. I says, why not? I mean, why not tell? He says, well, you know, recently the GBC, they made this decision. It's kind of like one of their directives that no one should really go there except for the GBC members. And when I heard that, it was like an explosion in my heart. How dare they? How dare they? Prabhupada told to us, to everyone clearly, go to him for guidance. He can write the purports to Srimad Bhagavatam, very clear. And they have the audacity to try to restrict us disciples who are also senior by that time, that we cannot go, but they can go. So I said, I'm going with you tomorrow. So the next evening, we slipped out of the front gate, something like 4 or 5 o'clock in the evening, and made our way to the Ganga and took the rowboats across. At that time, no motorized boats. Came to the other side, got a rickshaw, and then he suggested we should go and purchase a couple of dabs, green coconuts, as a gift when we come there. So then we rode on the rickshaw all the way there to Sri Chaitanya Saraswati Mat. And it was summertime, it was very hot at that time, it was around May. And Srila Sridhar Maharaj, when we entered the front gate, then his disciple greeted us, and he knew Subhag. Subhag Swami now, he's one of the ISKCON gurus. Nice devotee. So then, we entered the gate and there was an electrical blackout, like usually happens in India. So, it was just like, there was some moonlight because it was near to the full moon time. So, I don't know if we even brought flashlights, but anyway, we were told, Jai Shri Shri Guru Gauranga Gandharvika Giridhari, Shri Shri Radha Govinda Jiyo Ki Jai. So this disciple greeted us, and he said, yeah, Guru Maharaj, he's on the rooftop, and you can go up to meet him. Now, any of you who go to India, you can go now to the exact same place where he lived all those years. You can go in his room, you can go on the veranda, his chair is there with the long armrests, and it's basically exactly the same as it was then in 1979. So now, as we neared the stairway to walk up to the rooftop, my heart started fluttering. And it was in my mind and in my heart. In my mind and in my heart, I was very deeply absorbed in thinking, what will it be like to meet another pure devotee like Srila Prabhupada? And I didn't know the biography of Srila Sridhar Maharaj at that time, what service, what preaching he had done. We practically didn't know anything about him. What we knew, because of what Prabhupada said, he must be a pure devotee, there's no doubt. You know, who can write purports to Srimad Bhagavatam unless he's a pure, realized devotee, right? So, and having already heard his Katha through the transcription, I was feeling like I'm walking up these stairs to directly meet an ancient sage, someone who is from bygone eras and he's still in this world. At that time, he was nearly 80 years old, you know. So we walked up this very narrow staircase that went up to the next floor. And as we got to the next floor, in the distance, not far, it's like from here to that wall, then we saw the reflection of Srila Sridhar Maharaj's body in the moonlight. And he was lying on a bed, and there was like a kerosene lantern nearby. And he was just lying on his back, because he was not well physically at all during that time. And even for the remainder of the next 11 years while he was on the planet. He actually thought that he would leave the planet before our Srila Prabhupada did. And you can see photos of them standing together in 1977. He looked very gaunt and not well. So he went through a very great health crisis at that time. And so he was lying on this one of those wooden beds, you know. And there was a disciple who was fanning him. So we approached, and I paid my dandavats right next to the bed, and Subhag. And then the disciple informed Srila Sridhar Maharaj that we've come. And then, he already knew Subhag, so he began to speak to Subhag in Bengali. And Subhag informed him that he had come along with one of his American Western godbrothers, and he wants to meet you for the first time, you know. And so they talked for a minute or so in Bengali, and then Srila Sridhar Maharaj just lying on his back, and I was actually this far from his head, sitting on the floor, this far, this far from his head, and he's lying there and just looking upward. And I'm like that close. And he began to speak. What was he speaking? He began to speak about the holy name of Krishna. Now, probably at that time, I didn't know the verse of Rupa Goswami, which a lot of us now are familiar with, that Rupa Goswami wrote this verse describing the holy name of Krishna, the two syllables, Krishna, right? And tunde tundavani ratam vitanute tundavali labdai karana kroda kadamba. So he began to speak about Krishna's name, and he was just exuding this nectarine flow of rasa and nectar. And I'm listening to this. And, you know, we had not heard this kind of Katha. His mood was very unique personality. As already has been told, he was the topmost Sanskrit poet. Topmost. Srila Sridhar Maharaj had written the entire life of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the most exquisite Sanskrit poetry. And the name of that publication is the Padmanabha Deva Stotram, 72 verses, describing every segment of Mahaprabhu's manifest pastimes. Even his god brother, Srila Krishnadas Babaji Maharaj, Akinchana Krishnadas Babaji, who was very close with Srila Sridhar Maharaj, he would sing this. He was like the Kirtan Acharya in the Gaudiya Math, Krishnadas Babaji. He would sing this Padmanabha Deva Stotram by memory all the time. He loved the poetry of Srila Sridhar Maharaj. And then Krishnadas Babaji would also go to the birthplace of Srila Sridhar Maharaj. There's a village in Gauramandala called Hapaniya. Hapaniya means sweet waters. He was born there in Gauramandala. And Krishnadas Babaji would go there to his birthplace. Srila Sridhar Maharaj heard about this, that he was going to his birthplace and circumambulating, taking the dust and everything like that. So then one time he said, Babaji Maharaj, why you are going to my birthplace? And then he says, because your compositions, the verses, the poetry that you have written, I consider that practically on the same level as Srila Rupa Goswami's. That Padmanabha Deva Stotram, the meter of that whole, is 1 meter used all the way throughout. And it's the meter introduced in some of the famous poetry of Rupa Goswami. We know because we sing every single morning. Sujanara Buddhara Ditapada Yugam Yuga Dharma Durandara Patravaram Varadabaya Dayaka Puja Padam Pranamami Sada Prabhupada Padam. When Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur read that prayer composed by him, then he was so appreciative, and he said, this should be sung in every single one of my temples in Gaudiya Math, which it is being done to the present day. So Srila Sridhar Maharaj, when Krishnadas Babaji told like that, he said, you shouldn't go to my birthplace like that. This is the kind of respect and appreciation that most of the disciples of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had for Srila Sridhar Maharaj. I mean, Srila Bhakti Pramod Puri Maharaj, who joined the Math something like at least, 6 years before Srila Sridhar Maharaj did. He considered Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj to be his Siksha Guru. We already heard about Param Gurudev, how he took sannyas from him. Many of the disciples of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, they looked at Srila Sridhar Maharaj as being Siksha Guru for them, including our Srila Prabhupada. So, at the time of the disappearance of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, in the presence of all the disciples, all crowded into the room, in his final time on the planet, they were all there, and Bhaktisiddhanta Prabhupada, he was not well at that time, and he called on Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj, I want you to sing Sri Rupa Manjari Pada. What is that song? Who wrote that song? Narottam Das Thakur. That song is practically considered the highest song in our disciplic succession, where Narottam Das Thakur is singing to the lotus feet of Sri Rupa Manjari. So Srila Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta wanted to hear that song sung by Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj. Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj was not amongst the devotees who were generally kirtan leaders. Kirtan leaders. There were others who used to sing so much kirtan, and one of them, in fact, it was Bhakti Pramod Puri Maharaj, who was brahmachari then. Very beautiful voice. They used to go on radio programs in Calcutta, and they would do kirtan. So anyway, Srila Sridhar Maharaj was somewhat hesitant in the presence of all the godbrothers to begin to sing the song. And he began in a kind of hesitating way as he was singing, but he began to sing. But after a minute or so, the secretary of Srila Prabhupada, who was named Kunja Bihari at that time, he stopped Srila Sridhar Maharaj from singing. And then he said, I forget his brahmachari name, Bhakti Pramod Puri Swami Maharaj. He should sing. So then Srila Bhakti Pramod Puri Maharaj began to sing, because he was such a kirtaniya. And then Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati stopped him. He says, no, I don't want to hear the melodious voice. I want to hear Sridhar Maharaj sing. Then he began. And in the presence of everyone there, he sang the song. And after that meeting, all the disciples who were there, they all felt the same thing. They told to one another that it felt to them that Prabhupada was giving direct entrance to Srila Sridhar Maharaj into the kunja of Rupa Manjari. When they told that to Srila Sridhar Maharaj, he didn't accept that, of course. But he said, if anything, at least I was posted on the outside of the kunja to guard. That's why his name, Bhakti Rakshak, the guardian of devotion. So, Srila Prabhupada, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he knew the realization of Srila Sridhar Maharaj and so many others, and all the astonishing preaching that Srila Sridhar Maharaj had done in service when he joined the Mutt, and traveling all over India. There's a whole biography of that and how his relationship with his godbrothers. Tonight I'm going to read Srila Bhaktivigyan Bharati Goswami Maharaj's Katha, which came. And because Srila Bharati Maharaj, somewhat like the time period of our Gurudev, when he joined the Mutt, there were so many exalted disciples of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur still living. Our Gurudev used to say, I was so fortunate that when I joined and surrendered to my Gurudev, he had so many exalted godbrothers who I was so fortunate to hear from, to serve them like this. So many Siksha Gurus I have. Same with Srila Bharati Maharaj. That book, My Beloved Masters. How he gave us all this history that we would never have known, and even future generations of devotees would never have known if Srila Bharati Maharaj would not have spoken all these glories of all these great personalities. Tremendous contribution that he gave. And it enables us to understand what was their level. So many of them. We had no idea of this, especially when in the early days, because Prabhupada was everything to us. We didn't know any others. But amongst all those disciples who were so exalted, Srila Sridhar Maharaj was in that very echelon, that category. And somehow or other, by incredible mercy, our Srila Prabhupada had such a deep, deep relationship with him how he lived with Srila Prabhupada in Calcutta for 11 years, off and on, coming back and forth from Navadvip to Calcutta for preaching, and he lived in the house of Srila Prabhupada, and they had so many conversations, and Prabhupada considered him his Siksha Guru. And he told this to the disciples when Srila Sridhar Maharaj came to Mayapur, and they sat together on the Vyasasan. There's photos of that. It's a reddish colored Vyasasan, and they're sitting side by side in Mayapur. And Prabhupada was introducing Srila Sridhar Maharaj to his Western disciples, maybe 72, 73. And Prabhupada said there, they were talking with one another. There's a transcription of that whole conversation. And Prabhupada was describing how intimate is their relationship, and then he said, Krishna liked him to prepare me. Prepare for what? For his mission, to give this to the whole world. Srila Sridhar Maharaj was there. What we received from Srila Prabhupada was also enhanced by Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj. So, the personality, Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj, he was so unique and special personality. And he was also very, very humble. He used to talk about himself in a, what's it called? No, like in a deprecating way, self-deprecating, that's the word. He would say, I'm a backward pushing man. He used that term, backward pushing man. He did not like to be in the foreground. I mean, the whole history of his life, especially after some breakup in the Gaudiya Math, Srila Sridhar Maharaj, he wanted to go very deep in bhajan. This was his desire, and he said this was a dilemma for him. It was a dilemma for him. How was it? Because the nature of his Guru Maharaj, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, was so pushing the preaching mission, right? And all the disciples, they barely had any time to do too much studying and like this, because they were all preaching. It was like such a revolution in India, what Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, how he engaged all these young men and how they did what they did. So, but after the disappearance of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, we all have heard this before, there was some breaking up of the institution and so forth. So Srila Sridhar Maharaj wanted to do bhajan in Navadvip Dham. This was his resolve. He made this resolve. But then he had these doubts that my Guru Maharaj, he did not approve of seclusion, bhajan in seclusion, nirjan bhajan it's called, going off alone, doing bhajan in seclusion. But yet, Srila Sridhar Maharaj's nature was such. And so, at one point, when he made his decision that he wanted to now live in Navadvip, and that's it. So he thought to himself, if I'm going to succeed in this attempt to live in Navadvip Dham, I will need the permission. Permission from who? Who would you have to go to get permission to live in Navadvip Dham? The Dham Ishvara. And who is that? Nityananda Prabhu. So Srila Sridhar Maharaj decided, I will go to his birthplace, Sri Nityananda Prabhu. And there, at his birthplace, I will beg his permission. So he went to Ekachakra. He went there to Ekachakra. And Srila Maharaj himself has told the story. He said when he was bowing down and doing Dandavat Pranams in front of the deity of Lord Nityananda, then what happened? Oh, he said a voice came into his heart, like a thunderbolt, he said. Not externally, but in his heart. So, what did that voice say? You are coming to pray for the mercy. But you don't want to give out the mercy. Nityananda Prabhu himself. And that was the answer. That was his answer. What did he then understand what he needed to do? He needed to make a compromise. A compromise between his inner call and his inner nature and the order of his Guru Maharaj to preach everywhere. So what did he do? He established Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Mat. And Srila Sridhar Maharaj told about how this became the place of his heart seva, he called. My heart seva began. And he stayed there in that mat. And his compromise was to go outside periodically. And generally he would travel to Calcutta. And there he stayed with Abhay Charanaravinda Prabhu in his house. And he also did preaching engagements, which Srila Prabhupada sometimes went with him. And 11 years he was doing that. Srila Sridhar Maharaj also had been approached by many devotees requesting initiation from him after Gaudiya Math breakup and all that. But Srila Sridhar Maharaj was very hesitant to do that. He said there was a couple of other incidences that took place that affected his vision in that regards. He described that one of these messages that he received was when he was in Calcutta, in the very main central area called Dalhousie Square in Calcutta, and it was during the Second World War. And there was a big, huge billboard there in the Dalhousie Square, and it showed a picture of a military uniform, because at that time they were trying to recruit so many men, for the Indian Army during this war period. And next to the picture of the military uniform were the words, "Just wear this uniform and it will teach you what to do." And he took that as a sign, as a signal. Okay, my Guru Maharaj is telling me I have to do this. Then another incident happened. There was some doctor, I believe he was an Ayurvedic doctor, that Srila Sridhar Maharaj had met. And when he was meeting the doctor, then he somewhat challenged that doctor. And he said, "You are practicing medicine. Are you fully knowing everything of the medical knowledge? Are you in full knowledge of all the medical knowledge?" And then the doctor said, "No, I cannot say I'm in full knowledge. I have partial knowledge, And then Srila Sridhar Maharaj, "Well, if you don't have full knowledge, how can you venture to practice medicine? And then the doctor replied, "Well, the fact is that I don't have full knowledge, I have partial knowledge, and there are so many others who also have partial knowledge. But if someone was expected to gain the full knowledge before they would begin to practice medicine, then the whole medicine field would disappear. And Srila Sridhar Maharaj, acha, yes, okay. That was the next incident. And the third one was this Nityananda Prabhu. So at that point, Srila Sridhar Maharaj realized, I will have to carry out the order of my Guru, but at the same time, he stayed there in Navadvip Dham, right near to the banks of the Ganga in his mutt. And he said, my whole life, and to relish the conclusions of all the previous acharyas, tasting and relishing. He would recite so many different shlokas in his bhajan. Actually, it was recorded one time by a disciple. He made it into a small book, all the prayers that he would recite. And this went on for years. Srila Sridhar Maharaj was so deep. Spend a lot of time there at the mutt. He became the gardener of the mutt there. And when Gurudev came to Australia, he was the host for Gurudev there in Morwellava. A lot of the younger devotees will know his two stepdaughters. Raga Leka and the blonde-haired one. What's her name? No, something else. But anyway.
One out of two is not bad.
Yeah. So Srila, Srila Sridhar Maharaj. Chandramukhi. Yeah. Chandramukhi, that's right. And their mother, I forget her name, but she just recently passed away. Their mother. So this Braj Prabhu, he told me a story once. Because I met him there in the last year when I went to see Srila Sridhar Maharaj in 1988. I was living in Badger at that time, and then I went in January of 88, like 7 months before Srila Sridhar Maharaj departed. That was when Pran sent me to India with the big donation to give to Gurudev, and that's when I first met Gurudev one-on-one in 88. And then I went to see Srila Sridhar Maharaj, and I was there about maybe 10 days. So, and I met Brajaballabha at that time. We knew each other from then. And then years later...
From 88?
Yeah. So then years later when Gurudev started going to the West, and he came to Australia, so I knew him from then. And he told me this story that, very few Western devotees during those final couple of years of Srila Sridhar Maharaj on the planet, he wasn't well, and there weren't that many Western devotees who were coming, especially staying there in the mutt. But he did. And to stay in Srila Sridhar Maharaj's mutt as a mattvasi, especially his own disciples, he didn't so much do this for the Western devotees, but his own disciples were not allowed to go outside of the mutt unless they came to Srila Sridhar Maharaj and told Guru Maharaj, I'm going to the market now, like that. So it became that way for Brajaballabha. He was like one of the only Western devotees to be treated in that same way. And he told me this story that one day he approached Srila Sridhar Maharaj in the morning time, and he was sitting in his chair, and he was deeply, deeply absorbed in his bhajan. He paid his obeisances. He said, oh, Guru Maharaj, I'm leaving Navadvip now to go to Calcutta. I have some things to accomplish there. And he said, Srila Sridhar Maharaj, he kind of like his eyes. And then he said, you are going to leave Navadvip Dham? Oh, Navadvip, it is not a place to leave. What was his realization? What was he expressing? Years after Prabhupada left the planet, everything, pretty much everything, was recorded. And I know our late Nishringa Maharaj, they had the whole library. They said 1,200 hours of Katha. And that's what the books are made from that Katha, transcribed. And Srila Sridhar Maharaj, he spoke on certain topics pretty often, but every single time he spoke, it was completely unique, completely fresh. He was the Siddhanta Acharya of the Gaudiya Math prior to his departure. If there was ever any Siddhantic question, it would come to him. And he would give the proper understanding. So Srila Sridhar Maharaj was requested by our Srila Prabhupada in 1977, when the last time that Prabhupada went to visit him. Then Srila Prabhupada spoke to him and he told him, he says, I have come to you because I feel a very great need to consult with someone. But I see there is no one. Because Prabhupada was surrounded by his young Western disciples. We've come to consult with you. And then Prabhupada told him, he said, actually, I want that you will come and you will live with me in Mayapur. Jayapataka is building a house for me. We will live there together. And you are not well. You will not have to go anywhere with your own energy. Everything will be arranged. He's also building a lift, an elevator. And I want that you will come there. He even told him, I want you to be the president of ISKCON. President. And so he was in such a mood of requesting Srila Sridhar Maharaj to come and that he would help his disciples. But as I told before, Srila Sridhar Maharaj was not in good health, and he actually at that time, he felt that he may leave very soon. But it turned out the opposite. Prabhupada left. And he stayed. And even in this condition, for so many years, 11 years, he stayed on the planet, and so many Western devotees began to come to him. There's a whole history of how they began to come, and then there's the unhappy history of how they made the biggest mistake they could possibly ever make in the history of Western Gaudiya Vaishnavism, to reject such a person, even after hearing so much Katha from him. But Srila Sridhar Maharaj, he told Prabhupada at that time, yes, I will come there sometimes, and then sometimes I will be here, like that. Later on, when Srila Sridhar Maharaj was asked why he didn't accept Prabhupada's invitation, Srila Sridhar Maharaj he said, I do not want to disturb Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj's unique, supreme position of being the world founding Acharya. He knew that if he would go there, there would be some misunderstanding. So Srila Sridhar Maharaj, they all began to come to him. Prabhupada wanted him to help his disciples, and now his disciples began to come to him. I'm aware of the time. Yeah. I'm just winding it up. So Prabhupada wanted them to come to him, and Srila Sridhar Maharaj, he was also requested by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. This was a very, kind of a recurring mood in him, that he was not able to go to the West, although he had been requested, right?
Oh, right.
And he was sitting with Srila Prabhupada once. He told me this in my first couple of meetings with him in 1979. He told me that once I was sitting with your Prabhupada, your Gurudev, and I was lamenting to him that I could not go to the West to fulfill his desire. And then your Guru Maharaj told me, he says, that is all right. I am traveling all over the world. I will bring all my disciples to you, and you train them up how to go back to Godhead. And then he looked at us. There was just me and this Subhag sitting in front of his chair. And he leaned forward and he said to us, so why they have made this rule that you cannot come to me? 79. This was. His heart was so much loving and affectionate to all the Western devotees. And he just wanted to give everything that was in his heart. And then he did. Those lectures, those katha, those darshans that he gave were so important knowledge that he gave, because he was giving the necessary installment to connect us to the Braj Bhakti ultimate goal. He was preparing everybody through that. And what he gave, Bhakti Pramod Puri Maharaj, who, as you all know, was practically the chief editor of all the publications during the time of Gaudiya Math Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And he had that mood of reverence for Srila Sridhar Maharaj. So when he looked at the books that started to get published in the early 80s, like Maharaj has mentioned, Sri Guru and His Grace, Search for Sri Krishna Reality, the Beautiful, Srila Puri Maharaj was looking at that, reading the Katha of Srila Sridhar Maharaj in English language. And you know what he told? He said, what Sridhar Maharaj has given here, he has never given like this before in Bengali. All of these books should be translated from English into Bengali. See? Srila Bhakti Pramod Puri Maharaj told that Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj, he is like a very fragrant lotus flower in the middle of a dense forest, and is emanating this sweetness in all directions, this fragrance, and all the bumblebees are coming, and the animals, and all the whole forest is coming there to relish this. So in the same way, he is sitting there on the veranda in Navadvip Dham, and the whole world is coming there to hear his katha. So he did fulfill the desire of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur by preaching to the entire world, still doing it now, through all of his books. Any devotee who wants to really advance on this pathway that our Gurudev Bhaktivedanta Narayan Maharaj, that Srila Prabhupada came to give to us, this installment will be necessary for anyone who wants to truly enter what Gurudev has come to give. Because most persons not qualified. Most. Gurudev even told that. But to become qualified, Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj's installment is very essential. Why? Because there are 3 topics of knowledge in the Vedic scriptures. Mahaprabhu pointed this out: Sambandha Gyan, Abhideya Gyan, and Prayojana Gyan. You must have Sambandha Gyan. But then you also must have Abhideya Gyan. Who is the Acharya of Abhideya Gyan? Srila Rupa Goswami. Who is the Acharya of Sambandha Gyan? Sanatana Goswami. And who is the Acharya of Prayojan? Srila Raghunath Das Goswami. So, in completing, I'm going to tell this real quick. Srila Gurudev, every year, he would sit on the stage during Kartik. And on the, appearance day of Srila Sridhar Maharaj, he would have us stand up like in Gopinath Bhavan on this big stage and speak. And so he called on me on Srila Sridhar Maharaj's appearance day. And as I was completing what I spoke that day in front of Gurudev, and I'm watching Gurudev, because we wanted to make sure that by Gurudev's expression that it's okay what we're telling. But then I became a little bit hesitant, even a little fearful, to say what I was about to say. And there's a whole story leading up to that. But what I wanted to tell them, in conclusion, just as there are these three Acharya personalities in our disciplic succession, the ones that I just mentioned, who are the Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana Acharyas. So then I said, actually, in this present day, this modern day, all throughout the world, all the devotees in every country, everywhere, lakhs of devotees and people that have come in contact with the Krishna consciousness movement, they will have to read the books of the modern day acharyas, of Sambandha Gyan, Abhideya Gyan, and Prayojan Tattva. And who are those three personalities who have given this to the whole world? And then I said, our Srila Prabhupada, he is the Sambandha Tattva Acharya by giving the foundation. And Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj, he is the Abhideya Tattva Acharya by describing how to enter bhakti, how to do surrender, sharanagati, everything he laid it all out. How to go towards Radhadasyam by doing this. And then I said, in front of the whole audience of like 1,000 devotees there, and I said, and the Prayojan Tattva Acharya of our disciplic succession is our beloved Gurudev, Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj. And all the devotees, they just cheered, and I'm looking at Gurudev, and he was okay. He was okay with that, So,
You took a risk.
yes. So I still say the same thing. Every year, I say the same thing. And, I was challenged after that. Some ISKCON devotee, maybe he was there or he heard the recording of it, right? And he wrote me an email. I was in Hong Kong at the time, and he said, what are you saying here? That our Srila Prabhupada was only the Sambandha Gyan Acharya, and this and that, And then I had to clarify to him. I said, look, each one of these personalities, just like each one of the, Rupanuga and the original 6 Goswamis, they all taught all 3 of these. But there was some speciality, and this is all I'm saying. And I dare you to challenge me on this, because I'll prove it, that the majority of what Prabhupada spoke was Sambandha Tattva, in his lectures. He gave everything in his books, but especially in what he taught.
Yeah.
And I said the same thing, Srila Sridhar Maharaj, and then Gurudev. No question about it. Who else traveled the entire world for 15 years and gave Prayojan Tattva to the entire world, Braj Bhakti? It was his time to do it. It was Srila Sridhar Maharaj's time to do what he did. And Prabhupada gave the foundation, So we should know that there are so many important acharyas who also have given so many incredible important books. And Srila, I'm ending right now. Right. So they gave, like Bhakti Pramod Puri Maharaj, so many incredible books from him. Now Bhakti Vigyan Bharati, all these acharyas are so important. But amongst them, these 3 have this unique position that everyone has to read their books. Everyone has to associate with their Vani. And then the whole process becomes very clear. So there's so much more to speak, and it always happens this way. But, tonight we're going to have one more class. I invite all the devotees to come, and we're going to hear Srila Bharati Maharaj's glorification of Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj. So I'm offering my unlimited dandavat pranams to the lotus feet of my beloved Siksha Gurudev, Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Goswami Maharaj on his divine appearance day, and praying for his mercy, that he can shower his mercy on all of us and we can become genuine Vaishnavas. Vancha kalpatarubhascha Kripa sindhu eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavibhyo.
Is the class tonight at 6 then, or what time is the class tonight? 6. 6, okay.
I didn't realize the first time we did that was Gurudev. That's a good story.